put your name and then your title below, which would be your Master Sergeant.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And then we'll go into talking about your story.
Okay.
So you can state your name now, please.
Okay. My name is John Koenig. You can pronounce it Koenig or Koenig. It's a German name. I am from, my address is 196 Koenig Road, West Winfield. I was a Master Sergeant when I retired, and my serial number is 12002294. I'll never forget it.
Is that Army?
That's Army.
Army.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's U.S. I'm sorry, U.S. Army Air Corps. U.S. Army Air Corps. I was in the U.S. Army Air Corps. Now that was before it became the U.S. Air Force. So when you say Air Corps, that sort of dates a little bit to indicate, you know, in the service a little bit earlier than most people would assume. Because most people come in on the U.S. Air Corps if they join the Air Corps. So,
Someone else told me that. I didn't realize that. It's something I've learned since we've been talking to people. I've learned many things since we've been talking to people. Why don't you tell us about how you got into the service?
I graduated from West Winfield Central School in 1939, and that we were coming out of the Depression at that particular time. Hitler was starting his conquest of countries. My dad was in the First World War. He could speak German fluent, and he was in the Army of Occupation because he could speak German, so to help after the war in getting supplies and so on. When Hitler first started out, and I was listening too, but I couldn't understand German, we had a Philips battery-powered radio, and he would be listening to Hitler and his ramping speeches, and he had an inclination that a lot of people didn't have, and he said, we're going to get into this war regardless of the neutrality and staying out of the war in Europe and so on. And he said, you can do what you wish, but I would suggest that maybe you join the service so you don't go in as unprepared as I was. He had 6 weeks of training, and he was in the deadliest battles of World War I, Bellawood and Aragon Force and all those that you hear about. He was in all of those battles. So I thought possibly that was a good idea. So I joined. Now, not that he forced me, so I joined the U.S. Army Air Corps, volunteered for the U.S. Army. Peacetime again, we had to wait a whole year from the time of 39 after graduation until July 5th, 40, when I was called. So I entered then the service in 1940. We went to Utica Station. They picked us up there. We went to Syracuse to be sworn in. And then we got on the train and went to New Rochelle to Fort Slocum. And that was just a holding area. We were there for about a couple of weeks. Then went to Brooklyn, got on the Army transport, and went down through the Panama Canal up to San Francisco to Angel Island, which was another holding area, until enough troops came in. And then we were on a ship, and we went to the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands, and that's where Hickam Field and Pearl Harbor is located. What people sometimes don't realize, and you don't hear too much, is that the island of Oahu was considered the strongest fortress in the world. Now this is in 1940 now, because the Pacific Fleet was there. That power, one of the things. In Ford Island was the Naval Air Station. Hickam Field, which is right adjacent to Pearl Harbor, just a wire fence separating the two, and that's where I was stationed. Hickam Field at that time was the largest bomber base in the U.S. Then we had Wheeler Field, which was the big pursuit base. Schofield Barracks was the home of 4 infantries. Bellows Field was a smaller Army air base. Kaneohe Bay was a naval air station, and they had 22 what they call PBYs. These are ships that are reconnaissance ships. They can land on water or land. And then there were all kinds of batteries of anti-aircraft gunneries and signal corps units. So when you put all that together, it was a very strong fortress. That island was actually a fortress. So many people don't realize that, but when they do, then the big question is, how could anyone ever had a surprise attack, or that surprise attack, and do the damage that they did at Oahu, let's say. This is another thing that sort of bothers me a little bit, because being a Pearl Harbor veteran, we always talk about Pearl Harbor. And the people have the concept that all that there was is Pearl Harbor. And they see the ships, and that was it. They don't realize the damage that was done to the bombers at Hickam Field, to Wheeler Field, to Bellows Field, to Kaneohe Bay. All of that was just as destructive as Pearl Harbor, but you only hear Pearl Harbor. And there was probably a reason for that. Was the short term, because how could you maybe list all of these things? But anyway, people have a misconception that it's only Pearl Harbor, and there was a lot more destruction than just that particular installation. So,
what were you doing? What were you assigned to before the attack happened? What were you doing?
well, when we first arrived, we had our drill, basic training there. Let's put that. I'll be very quick on this one here. Again, peacetime, the Army wasn't moving as fast as they should as far as getting supplies and all that in. So we had to do our basic training in our woolen uniforms in the tropics. So a number of us, including myself, developed a heat rash. So under our arms and our crotch, and I mean it was a heat rash. So for a week I was in a spread eagle position on my bunk with calamine lotion underneath my armpits and in my crotch here until that healed up and the khakis came in, and so then we continued on. But that was our first experience. I went to aircraft mechanics school, graduated from there, but again, no build-up. There weren't any new planes coming in that needed extra crews. So I said, well, standing around, what else can I do here? So I asked if there was another school open, and they said there was an auto mechanics school open, but I'd have to transfer to the 481st Ordnance, Air Corps Ordnance, which I did. So I was with the 484 Ordnance at the time of the attack. So what was I doing? Okay. So then when the attack did come, I said to Karl Weissman, would you join me with an Army truck here to go out to the bunkers where we had the ammunition and pick up some bombs, and we'll go to the flight line and see if there are any planes that are ready to take off. Well, he said that he would. So we loaded six 100-pound bombs on a trailer and started toward the flight line. We then were discovered by a pilot seeing us coming across. So there was a Caterpillar tractor that was at the, it was between the airfield at Hickam and Rogers Airport. Rogers Airport was a small airport, and they were filling in for the 3 years that I was there, filling in with coral rock, a little at a time. That Rogers Airport is now the Honolulu Airport. So it took a long time to fill all that in. So when you land now, you'll see Hickam Field, because the Honolulu Airport extends that far. They extended the field, made a bigger field out of it. So why was that Caterpillar tractor there? I'm going back, because I shouldn't be here today when I give you some of my stories here. So anyway, when we saw the pilot, we stopped with our load of bombs and hid behind that tractor, and while he strafed us, and they had a great time. They were only a couple hundred feet above. We could see him smiling, and I heard these pictures, and I said, well, that's actually true. We could see him smiling. They would tip and almost wave to us and say, well, we've got you. They turned around, came back, so we switched to the other side of that tractor, and well, then he went beyond that. And so we were saved ourselves there, but the other point is that load of bombs was only about 100 feet from that Caterpillar tractor. Why didn't you hit that load of bombs? If you hit that, we wouldn't be here today, Karl and myself here.
So your friend was also saved, the two of you made it?
No, the two of us made it. We made it, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and the other point is, why was that Caterpillar tractor there? Because with the airport, they try to keep all the equipment off as much as possible. You never know when an aircraft is going to run off the runways. So, and here's the weekend, and that tractor was there. Now, whether it broke down or what, I don't know, but even if it did, you'd think they would have pulled it off, but it was there. And that always amazed me, too, why, when the orders were to always have this all equipment off, particularly on the weekend, this Caterpillar tractor there, and thank goodness it was, because it saved us. Well, then we continued on to the Pearl Harbor entrance of the runway, because the runway is going right across the entrance of Pearl Harbor, and then we started down where all the aircraft were. And, of course, we could see them all. They were burning, and tires were flat, fuselages had holes in, and other damage done. And we did come across two captains that said, get the H off the runway, it's suicide to be out here. Well, yeah, we knew, but we didn't. Well, we were trying to think maybe somebody would be taking off. But anyway, we continued on, and I remember two B-25s and two B-26 bombers at the very extreme end of the runway. There was a pilot and his crew there, the four of them, were standing by one B-25. Now, B-25, that's the bomber that General Doolittle had on the aircraft carrier, the Hornet, when they bombed Japan. Those B-25s, that was the ship that those bombers that were on that particular Hornet. So there were two of those and then two B-26s. So I told him, explained to him the condition of all these planes, that they're not in no condition to take off. Would you be willing to take off? Well, he had to think about it for a while. He wanted to know if we had guns or ammunition for his wing guns of the plane. We didn't have it. So finally he did say, well, then load it. So again, peacetime, they never used those Bombay, the mechanism in the Bombay to raise and the crew couldn't get it to work. And I was doing some weightlifting at the time, so I said, well, if you can balance these 100-pound bombs on my shoulder, I'll lift them up, because there isn't too much room in that Bombay anyway to lift these up. So all it could do was just get it on my shoulder and raise it up. So I was able to get it high enough so they could shackle in two on each side of the Bombay rack. And they took off. They were gone for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, came back. One of the crew was bleeding slightly, and I said, not knowing where the aircraft carriers were, I said, did you see it in the aircraft carrier? They didn't say a word. They got in the command car that mysteriously arrived, and they took off, and we never saw them since, and I heard from them. About 3 weeks after that, when things began to settle down after the attack, there was a notice on the bulletin board for any heroic attack or incident to report. Well, Karl and I thought, well, this was something we could report. And so we explained it to the officer who was in charge, and he didn't take our names. He just listened, and then we thought, well, this is very strange, and just walked away. Well, we went back another time, and these two officers were not there, but the orderly was there. We explained the situation and gave our name and our unit, but we were never called. Now, what bothers me about that whole thing is that not the fact that we were trying to get a medal out of this whole thing, is that later on, I worked for some 50 years trying to find out why those B-25s, two planes, were 25s and two B-26s, were never listed, because there were 8 congressional investigations regarding how many aircraft that were there, what the damage was done, and so on, and all trying to assess why a surprise attack happened and how much damage was done. But those planes were never shown up on any of the record. And because they were not on any record, the people that I talked to regarding what we did and what the crew did are assuming a little bit that maybe I'm making up a story because there's no record that those planes were there. Well, I know they were there. So I did have notice in one of our military journals, hoping I could contact one of those crew. So I don't know whether those 4 ever are even living today. But anyway, I did get reports from pilots that did say that those planes could have gone from the biggest jump from in the Pacific from the island, from the U.S. to the island of Oahu, is the longest route. That's about 2,200 miles. From there on, they could have gas enough in those planes to go from one island to another to get to wherever they were going. The assumption is that, from what I can gather, that these planes were part of President Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program. Now, he had tremendous power, Roosevelt, and he was probably the right man at the right time, just as Churchill was the right man at the right time there. And with that Lend-Lease, and a lot of questions were asked, well, what do we mean by Lend-Lease? And a lot of people yet today can't really explain just what that meant, Lend-Lease. Well, that was pretty much all just lend it to them. They never, or leased it, well, whatever, they never paid it back as far as I know. So they could have been going to China, or they could have been going to Chiang Kai-shek, or I mean to General Chennault, who was commander of the Flying Tigers. That was a volunteer group that was helping the Chinese. And there were a lot of Americans that were helping the Flying Tigers because of the war, because China was with the war with Japan for, what, some 9 years, from 31 on until the time of Pearl Harbor. So that's the only thing that we can assume that was, and of course all that was kept secret, and that's the reason why there was no records, or there were to be no records, because they didn't want, the administration, and Roosevelt in particular, didn't want anyone to know who was getting what equipment, because that would help the enemy, and so on. So because of that, it bothers me, because the Japanese can now say, and as they have said in boasting, that they destroyed Hickam Field to the point that not one bomber was airborne during the raid, and I have to live with this untruth, because that's not true. Because I was the one that loaded that bomb along with the help of the others, and that crew was heroic enough and so on to take off during the raid, and so that will always bother me.
I'm glad you had this opportunity to tell us.
Well,
I believe
something in the history books that you don't, and a lot of other things too, but these are some things that you're never going to read because most people don't know about it.
I'm sure there are some other things that we wouldn't read about that time, because you said what you were doing is you were coming across with your friend, and they were strafing you. Now, you must have heard something even prior to that. Did you hear that bombing start?
When I joined the Ordnance Corps, I had to leave the big barracks, that 3,000-man barracks. There's only 3 of those barracks, I understand, 3. Whole 3,000 men. I had to leave that and go across the parade ground, and I was then housed in what was then being built, 2-story wooden barracks. You probably see a lot of those pictures of those 2-story wooden barracks. Well, I can just back up just a little bit, because when I moved out of that wing, when the Japanese bombed and torpedoed, then they came around and then they machine gunned Hickam Field, strafed it. And some of their fellows were killed in bed in that very wing that I was living in, staying in. I could have been there. I don't think I'm always one that has to get up, but there's a possibility. I was at the mess hall door, and I was third from the door, and they closed the mess hall. Now, why did they close it early that morning? I don't know. Usually closes at 8 o'clock. The raid was at 7:55. I was in there prior to that, and they closed the door. Now, I think the reason why they closed the door is because 2 weeks prior to December the 7th, the base was on 24-hour alert. And being in the ordnance, we were belting ammunition for 12 hours on 12-hour shifts, then 12 hours off, and then 12-hour shifts again. And on Friday, before the Sunday of the raid, the alert was called off, and because we had worked for 12-hour shifts for 2 weeks, anyone that wanted a pass for the weekend, it was granted. 39 hours and 25 minutes later, they attacked. It bothered me at that time because having civics in high school, and this thing that bothers me, that they don't teach civics anymore in government, I was interested enough to follow, well, he was Ambassador Admiral Nomura from Japan, who was having conferences with Cordell Hull, our Secretary of State, regarding the tension and the problems because U.S. had cut off the shipment of oil and to gas and so on to Japan, and they were really concerned because they didn't have any source to fight their battles. They only had about 2 years left of supply, and it would put them in a position that they either had to go to war or suffer humiliation, and their culture doesn't permit that, so therefore they had to go to war. And U.S. was the culprit primarily because we shut off, and there's a lot that goes on into that situation. But I'm trying to lose my thought here on what was happening. Okay.
You had been talking about
Yeah, so there, okay, so then with the mess hall, okay. So anyway, okay, so that, I guess I'm trying to explain why they probably closed the door early. Because there were so many on pass that I think they didn't think that there'd be as many maybe back for breakfast that morning, so they only had food for X number of people. And I think that's one reason why they cut it off, not because of any other reason. I think they just ran out of food, so they're sort of counting. Well, I was third from the door. So anyway, the mess hall was bombed. The Japanese knew. They had spies all over that island. And right up until the last minute, they have evidence from the pilot planes that were shot down of the changes in the maps that they had where they were to bomb and so on. So that shows you how their spy system was really working right up until the very end. But that mess hall was bombed because they knew there'd be a group in there, and there were a number that were killed in that mess hall, and some of them were just from concussion. But I could have been in that. The chances are I wouldn't have heard the planes coming over, so I would have caught lost there. So I said, well, then I'll go to the PX on the way back to my barracks. And as I walked in, as I usually do, I always feel my billfold to get it out, and I didn't have it. And I thought, oh, God, this is strange. Never have I forgotten my billfold. So I didn't go there. But again, another area where there were a number of people, that was bombed, and that was leveled. So then I said, well, I'll go to the church, because that was all, well, within about 400, 500 feet from the barracks. But I said, well, I'll go back and get my billfold. Now, well, why, I don't know, because we don't need it. I didn't need my billfold. They didn't take a collection. And I knew my friend Joe Niles was in there. I was a Catholic at that particular time. And I was going to help him set up for Mass, because that was the first service, and then the Methodists would come in, and the Jewish would come in, and so on. They'd all use the same facility. So when I went back to get my billfold, one of the fellows was sleeping. He just woke up. He said, are you going to church? Wait a minute, and I'll go with you. While I was waiting for him to get there, that's when we heard the planes come. So I opened the screen up on the second floor, because I was on the second floor, and we saw these planes coming from Honolulu direction. And we thought, well, you know, the base is almost shut down. People's on pass. Where are these planes coming from? Well, then as they got closer, we could see the red circle. Well, we remembered the red circle from the ships that would come into Honolulu Harbor. So we said, God, these got to be Japanese, but how did they get here? Well, as they flew over the barracks toward Pearl Harbor, well, we ran to the other side of the barracks, and so we saw the first torpedoes drop, and then explosion after explosion. And the sound that I'll never forget, living on the farm, if a cow gets stuck in the mud, you'll hear the moo, trying to get out. They get exhausted trying to get out. That's what some of those horns were in the ships that I heard it moo, and all I could think of was a cow stuck there, and here's these ships. We're here. We can't move. We can't get enough energy up or fire up enough to put out of the way. They just have to take it. I'll never forget it. What a song. So anyway, we then ran out of there, because there was another situation where bullets were now strafing. They were coming through the wooden barracks, so we just got out of there by the skin of our teeth. But I could have been in that barrack, in that chapel, because they assumed that would be full people, and they hit that, and because that was made of wood, well, that was just splinters. Now, the only reason why they were able to identify Joe Niles is because we knew he was in there, but he was mincemeat. And like some of the others, because there's 711, I think, people that are buried in the Punahou Cemetery that they're in unmarked graves. They're just all in one because they can't identify them. They knew that it happened during the service, but Joe is one of them. But Joe was not in there because we could identify him, because we knew he was the only person that was in that mess hall. Otherwise, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have known that it was Joe that was in there. So I could have been in all those types of things here. Let's put it that way. So.
Was that time, were you running from place to place?
Surprisingly enough, when I came out of that building, we ran down so fast we knocked the screen door off at the bottom of the step, and I just stood there. I don't know. I had enough sense when I think about it, and don't ask me why, because that picture that I have over there, that's what I saw. I was looking at that big barracks that I came out of, and the smoke was coming. Well, the smoke, that wasn't bombed. Well, it was hit, but the smoke wasn't coming out of that. That was bombed more on the second raid. But I saw that flag. They'd hit that flag. The strafing was so tremendous that they hit that flag, and that flag was torn. Because when that picture there, I could see that flag. And all I could think of was my dad going through these terrible battles in World War I and what he must have gone through. So I had enough sense that when these pilots were flying and these bullets were coming out of the wings, all bullets when you put them together, there's a tracer bullet in about every 6 or 7 or so, depending on how well you want to put it. The tracer bullet, at night they can see it, and at daytime, if it hits something, the dirt being, since it's hot, it'll fly up a little bit. So it gives them an idea where their line of fire is going. Well, I could see that coming. And I did do a little shifting around. Now, that seems kind of strange, but after all, they were flying low, and they weren't flying that fast. I could do it. So there was a warehouse. I thought, well, maybe I could run over there. But then I thought, well, gosh, being a little with construction on the farm, we have to do a number of things. Well, that's a stupid thing, because if they hit that, all that brick would fall on me. So I just stood there. And probably that was the best thing, because if I ran crossfire, I probably would have been hit. But best if I stood there and let them try to hit me, then might run across, because I probably more likely to have gotten hit. So after the raid pulled back somewhat, that's when I asked Karl, would you want to join me, and let's get out of here and see if we can get some bombs. So that's what I was doing at that particular time. So stay my best to stay alive. Yeah. And to fight back. Yeah, the urge was, was your way to, yeah, when he asked about, I don't know, he said, I may have dug in the dirt. And I said, well, I don't think you would have. If you were with a group of fellows 24 hours a day, I said, you would have done the same thing that I did. You wouldn't think of it. Now, I'll have to take it back. Some did. I can't deny that. And there were some that got in refrigerators and other things and lost their life because they shut the door and they didn't find them. So there were some that, yeah, that didn't make it. So, but I think more than most of the people did.
What did it, how long did it feel like it lasted? I mean, you know, the whole episode.
Well, the whole episode, there were 2 raids. In essence, there probably would be 3 on Hickam Field because of the bombing, and then they came across the strait. But then they had a crew of aircraft that did come strictly designated. Every group of pilots had their own target to hit, and Hickam Field was one. So they did hit it twice. We probably had maybe 3 times, but 2 official raids on. And, well, it supposedly lasted about 2 hours and 15 or 20 minutes, I think, the 2 raids that happened here. But
what did it feel like to you? There was did time stand still? Did it elongate? What happened at that time? Do you know?
no, because really what happened after the raid was worse than during the raid. Because the rumors that were flying around were absolutely, we heard all kinds of rumors. And of course, at that time, we didn't have the walkie-talkies and all this to get any information. So the rumors, I don't know where they started. We heard that the Japanese had bombed the Panama Canal, that they'd bombed the West Coast, that they were going to land. And that was something that really concerned us because a good share of the population of Honolulu were Japanese and of Japanese ancestry. And so we thought, well, if the Japanese did join, there's a good chance that this group would join the Japanese because we didn't know how faithful they were to us. And that was the biggest concern afterwards on standing guard and all that. Who do we know? How many are going to come pouncing on us here? Because we would have been outnumbered if they did come in there. So the weeks after the tension, now we were out in the bunker area because we had to move out from those barracks. They eventually got tents, so we were living in the wooded area where those bunkers were. Kind of a stupid place too, because if you hit those bunkers, we'd all been gone. But that had no choice. So I wasn't able to take, well, none of us were, able to take our clothes off, or our shoes off, or anything. We always had to be ready, because that just shows you the tension. Because